So today we're going to talk about blood, we're going to talk about muscles, kind of the body coverings and linings, and then also tissue repair. But we're going to start with blood. Blood is going to be an atypical type of connective tissue. Atypical. In that it doesn't really connect things or give anything mechanical supports. So does not connect things or give mechanical support, which is what most of the things we've talked about so far. However, it does connect the entire body together in the sense that it's going to be able to move throughout the entire body in the blood vessels. Okay, the reason why it's in the connective tissue group, even though it's quite different, is because it's going to develop from mesenchyme, which is the kind of the standard tissue that all connective tissues develop from. So we'll say develops from mesenchyme. And it's also going to contain blood cells. So those are going to kind of be the cells that are going to be what's in the blood, which is going to be surrounded by a fluid matrix, which makes it similar to the other connective tissues. So it develops from mesenchyme, which is the main, all connective tissues develop from this. And then it's going to contain blood cells surrounded by a non-living matrix of blood plasma. Okay, so just like the other connective tissues, you have the cells, and then you're going to have the matrix that surround it. All right, so the cells that we're actually going to talk about, so there are going to be some different types. We're going to have red blood cells, which are one type. So red blood cells. And their technical name are erythrocytes. So make sure that if you read this word, you know that just means the red blood cells. So these are going to be the cells that carry oxygen. We also then have white blood cells. And these are going to be called leukocytes. Okay, and then we're going to have platelets. Okay, these are involved in blood clotting. Okay, so those are the cells, and then there are going to be fibers, just like in all the other connective tissues. And most of the fibers are going to be soluble protein molecules. So we'll put that on here. So soluble, so they are dissolved in a liquid. And these will precipitate, so that means that they'll form a solid during blood clotting. Okay, so this will only happen when blood clotting is necessary. Okay, so that's going to be kind of the major part of kind of the cells and the fibers. Now, connective tissue, their function is going to be a couple things. So the function of this specific connective tissue of blood . So the main function is going to be transport. So it's going to transport respiratory gases, so oxygen and CO2. Okay, so both, oxygen is going to be necessary for cellular respiration to take place, and CO2 is the byproduct of cellular respiration, so you have to get rid of it. It's also going to carry nutrients to all parts of the body. It's going to carry waste. CO2 is considered a waste, but it's going to also carry other waste products. And then it's also going to be able to transport things like hormones, ions, and some other substances. And the location of the blood connective tissue is going to be the blood vessels. Okay, so that one's kind of an easier one to understand. All right. So what this is going to look like is if you have a smear of blood, depending on kind of the place you're looking at the microscope, you can see different types of cells. And so here we have red blood cells. They're pretty stereotypical. They do not have a nucleus in it, so you should never see like a dark spot in the middle of a red blood cell. They actually lose their nucleus before they come mature. We also have a couple different types of white blood cells. The white blood cells, there can be different names, and we'll go over kind of some of those in a future lab. And we also have just plasma, which is going to be the fluid that everything is in. Okay, so that's going to be kind of our just brief introduction into the blood cells. All right, now from blood, we're going to start talking about muscles. So muscle tissue is going to be responsible for all kind of body movements. Okay, so we'll put this, it's responsible for most types of body movements. Okay, so just like when we were talking about some of the other kinds of tissues, whether it was avascular or vascular, muscle is going to be highly vascular. So it has a lot of blood vessels. This is really important because muscles are going to have to do a lot of cellular respiration in order for them to be able to contract and relax. Lots of stuff is going on in the muscle tissue, and it's going to require a lot of blood. Okay. Now the cells for this are going to, for the muscle tissue, are going to be tightly packed together. Okay, and muscle cells are going to possess something called myofilaments. And we're going to go into a lot more depth about muscles when we're in our actual muscle unit. But this is just going to kind of be a brief preview into that. So muscle cells possess myofilaments. Okay, and these myofilaments, they're going to be two major types that we'll talk about. They are going to be actin and myosin. Okay, and again, we will talk about actin and myosin in more detail later on. The main thing is that these cells in the actin and myosin allow for contracting. So these cells are capable of contraction. Okay, so they're going to be able to kind of contract, shorten. So like when you're flexing your muscles, you can see this. And they're going to be able to do work, like move things from one place to another. There are three types that we're going to talk about. Okay, so three types. The first type is going to be skeletal muscle. Okay, and this is going to be a type of muscle that we're going to consider voluntary. So this is kind of under conscious control. So we can decide to contract and relax. We can decide to walk, things like that, okay? So this has conscious control. So I'll put that on here. So you are actively controlling this. Okay, the second type we're going to talk about is going to be cardiac. And cardiac, this is going to be the heart. This is involuntary. And so it's an unconscious or no conscious control of this. So you are not having to say to your heart, pump, pump, beat, beat, pump my blood. It's just happening on its own. It's controlled kind of through these other mechanisms that are gonna be important in the body. Okay, and the last one is gonna be smooth muscle. And like cardiac, this is gonna be involuntary. So again, no conscious control of this. Okay, and we'll talk about smooth muscle is gonna mainly be like digestive organs and things like that, where you're not thinking about kind of moving food from one part of your body to the other. It's just moving on its own. All right, so we're now gonna move into each of the different types. So the main thing to know for this part of this unit is you wanna know the different types of the muscles, so skeletal, cardiac, and smooth, kind of where they would be found and what they look like, because they do look quite different from each other, and it kind of depends on their function. So the first group we're gonna talk about are gonna be the skeletal muscle. And in the name, this is going to be the muscles that are going to kind of interact with the skeleton or the bones that allow you to move, okay? So skeletal muscle, the tissue is going to have kind of tightly packaged form. Tissue is packaged. And it's actually going to be packaged around, so we're going to have the actual muscle is going to be surrounded by connective tissue. So the tissue is packaged by connective tissue. Okay, and these connective tissue are kind of in sheets. So we'll just put CT, connective tissue, so arranged in sheets. Okay, and when you kind of have a connective tissue around the actual muscle, that then is going to be what we would call a skeletal muscle. So when we look at kind of these in more detail, you can look at specific muscles, and the muscle will have kind of the fibers within the muscle, but then on the outside, you'll have this connective tissue. And you've probably run into this if you've ever kind of boned a chicken or kind of cut a chicken apart. You can see the kind of the connective tissue that is right over the actual muscle. Okay. So all the connective tissue kind of is arranged in sheets around the muscle. Okay, and then the muscles are going to be attached to the bones of the skeleton. Okay, and so often the connections are going to be some type of connective tissue for the actual connection to the bone. And we'll talk about, again, more of that when we're talking about the bones and the muscles and how they're connecting. All right, so the cells we are going to call muscle fibers. Okay, and what the muscle fibers look like are they are long and cylindrical. Okay, and they have multi-nucleuses, multiple nucleuses, or nuclei, I guess I should say, nuclei, or you could call them multinucleated, okay? They also are gonna have a striated appearance. Okay, and the reason why they look striated is because of the myofilaments. So we have kind of alternating actin and myosin that are going to kind of create this striated look. And so here is, again, skeletal muscle. So here is what a cell, like a skeletal muscle cell would look like. You have multiple nuclei kind of on the edges. And if you can see kind of this lined appearance, that's the striation. Okay, so these are the muscle cells. We have nuclei in between, and then the striations are going to be these alternating bands of actin and myosin that allow for these to contract. Okay, for the function of skeletal muscle, again, I want to just mention it's voluntary control, so we are kind of consciously in control of this. It's going to be involved in locomotion, so movement. And also another thing it's going to be involved in is facial expressions, which are very important in humans and kind of our closest relatives. So facial expressions are often kind of how we can communicate without being vocal, so nonverbal communication. Very important in humans. Okay. So moving on from skeletal muscle, the next type we're going to talk about is cardiac muscle. Okay, so cardiac is going to be only found in the heart. So you will not find this anywhere else. So if we ever show you cardiac muscle and we say, where is it found? It can only be found in the heart, okay? And specifically in the walls of the heart. Okay, so it's going to allow for blood to be propelled through the blood vessels in the entire part of the body. So the muscle of the heart is going to contract and send that blood to everywhere. Okay, so it contracts, or sorry, its contractions help propel blood through the blood vessels to all body parts. Okay, so the cells are going to look different from the skeletal muscle. So instead of kind of being these long fibers, cylindrical, these ones are actually going to be branching. So I'll show you a picture of that in a second. And there is striation in these ones. So you're gonna be able to kind of see the actin and myosin as well. Now, in the case of cardiac muscles, they are not multinucleated. They are going to have one centrally located nucleus. Okay, so that's going to be one of the identifiers for this. So you do not see kind of multiple nuclei on the edges. You're going to actually just see the centrally located in the middle of the cell. They also have this unique feature called the intercalated discs. Okay, so this is going to be a unique feature that you'd want to, if you can recognize it. And what the intercalated discs are these connection points from one cell to another. To the other. So it's really important for the heart muscles to be able to communicate with each other because they have to kind of contract as one unit to help kind of move the blood. Okay, a reminder, this is under involuntary control, so you are not having to consciously think about having your heartbeat. And show what this looks like. So here is what cardiac muscle looks like. So you can kind of see how there's a centrally located nucleus, and then you can see some striations in here. The big thing that I use to recognize this is that you see these intercalated discs, okay? And they're kind of like these dark spots. They kind of look like a seam on your clothing. And that is where they're tied together. So the two cells are actually going to be connected to each other, okay? And so there's more of a branching. So if you look at kind of the difference between skeletal and cardiac, you can see a pretty dramatic difference. So these are kind of long, straight, no branches, and these ones have kind of a more branched structure. Okay, and again, those intercalated discs are very, very important in the identification of cardiac muscle. All right. The last type of muscle that we'll talk about is going to be smooth muscle. And smooth muscle, its key feature is it has no striations. So you can't actually see those actin and myosin lines. Okay, so no, I should say visible striations. Okay, and the cells look different. They are going to be kind of spindle shaped. Okay, so spindle, and I'll show you what that means. These ones are a little bit easier to draw, where they kind of have this shape. They almost kind of look like an eyeball. They'll have a nucleus kind of in the middle, but they kind of have, this is a spindle shape to their structure. Okay, and I'll show you what that looks like in the actual slide in a second. Now, the smooth muscle is going to be found in hollow organs. Okay, except for the heart. So we don't find this in the heart because cardiac is going to be there. So the main locations are going to be the digestive tract, urinary tract, the uterus, and blood vessels. Okay, and so how these work is that they squeeze substances through the organ, okay? And they do it kind of by this contracting and relaxing, alternating contracting and relaxing. One way that you can kind of think of how this works is if you've ever seen a earthworm move, they kind of do this scrunch and then elongate thing. It's sort of a similar process of how food is actually going to move through kind of different parts of the digestive system. Okay, so it squeezes substances through organs by alternating, contracting, and relaxing. Okay, this is involuntarily controlled. Okay, so again, no conscious thought is necessary. The process of how this happens, we call peristalsis. So that's how food actually moves through the system, and it's that contracting and relaxing kind of alternating pattern. Okay, smooth muscle is also very important in blood pressure. Okay, because you can have constriction of the blood vessels to help regulate the blood pressure. So you don't want to have kind of these dramatic swings in the blood pressure. And so the actual smooth muscle of the blood vessels can help kind of alleviate any dramatic changes. Okay, so blood pressure, so we can have kind of the blood vessels help regulate BP, blood pressure. Okay, so here is what smooth muscle looks like. And so you can kind of see these spindle shapes. Again, they kind of look like eyeballs. When you're looking at the smooth muscle, you should see no striations. So we don't see like those little kind of lines that are going through. You're going to see the nuclei that are kind of evenly spaced out. They're not kind of, again, look very different from this where you kind of have all the nuclei on the edges. These ones look like they're just inside of the cells. And if we look at kind of the cardiac, again, you're going to see some major differences. So make sure that you can tell these ones different, kind of which one is which. All right. So we've talked about kind of blood, we've talked about muscles, and now I'm going to just do quickly a little bit about nervous tissue because we haven't kind of talked about that. And this will be something that you will go over in 50B. but we will just quickly mention kind of this last tissue type. Okay, so nervous tissue is going to be the main component of the nervous system. Okay, so main component of nervous system. Okay, and so when we talk about nervous tissue, we're talking about the brain, the spinal cord, there's no H, cord, and nerves. Okay, and the nervous system is going to kind of regulate and control body functions. There are two major types of cells. So the first type are going to be neurons. And the neurons are really highly specialized. So they are going to be able to generate and conduct, which kind of means send a message. So have this message go kind of throughout the cell to another cell. They're going to conduct nerve impulses. So again, this is something that you'll talk about much more in 50B. All right, the general structure of a neuron, and this is just kind of a, it's not a great, but kind of gets the image. So for a neuron, we have kind of the major section right here, which is going to be called the cell body. Okay, off of the cell body, we then have kind of these little branching points that go off of these things. These are going to be called dendrites, these little branches, and they can connect to other cells. So these are dendrites. Okay, so the little branches are the dendrites. Okay, this is the cell body, this is the nucleus. We then have this structure that kind of is going to conduct the nerve impulse to another kind of cell. This is going to be called the axon. And then we'll have kind of an axon terminus down here. We're not going to go into too much detail about this right now. Now, there is a second type, our group of cells that are going to be called kind of the glial cells. And these are support cells. So they are going to kind of support, they insulate and protect. So I actually drew some support cells. So what I'm trying to draw right here, these are going to be myelin sheath cells, which are insulator cells. Okay, so these four black structures are what we call the myelin sheath. And those are going to be really important in how nerve impulses are conducted down the axon. It actually really speeds up the process of the axon the nerve impulse being sent. Okay. One important thing to know about nervous tissue is that neurons they do not kind of go through mitosis, so they don't have a very good regenerative property. So if you damage neurons, there's not really anything we can do about it. Glial cells are highly mitotic, which means that they can actually go through mitosis and not really have any problem with that. Okay, so that is going to be nervous tissue. And let me just show you kind of an image of what this would actually look like on a microscope. So here we have kind of what I was trying to draw. Obviously, this is a little more detailed and you can see it a little bit better. But this is what the actual neurons would look like. So you can see the cell body really easily. It's sometimes hard to tell like where the axon is in most of these cases because some of these could be dendrites, but the axon is going to be kind of this major out point where it's going to send the message, this nerve impulse. Okay, so again, this is kind of just a very brief mention of the nervous tissue. All right, so we're gonna finish there and then I will start up a new video to talk about body membranes.